looking to get started. We're really happy to have Larry Persily here, a longtime journalist, worked on oil and gas issues. He's also served as Deputy Commissioner with the Alaska Department of Revenue and a staffer at the House Finance Committee co-chair. And he's owned several newspapers, been a long time journalist, and worked for the Anchorage Times, the Daily News, the Associated Press, Juneau Empire, and Petroleum News. So really happy to have you here, Larry.
Let me throw this down. Same remarks when I spoke to the so out in the Rotary today, and as I listened to the resume, I think, God, is it that obvious I can't keep a job? As I look out at the full room, I realize I haven't felt this popular in 20 years when one of my jobs at the Department of Revenue as Deputy Commissioner was to hear appeals on permanent fund dividend denials. And people would turn out for that because they were hoping I was going to overturn the rejection. But can't say I did, usually. Before I talk, I want to say when I was with the Federal Gas Line Office, we actually put together in 2014 a 24-page history of Alaska North Slope natural gas pipeline efforts, going back to the 60s for people who remember, and good or bad, not a whole lot has changed since 2014, other than the state's poured more money into it. So I had forgotten when I was teaching journalism at UAA, I had some of these reprinted. I thought, well, maybe there's some people here. So I've got about 30, so I'm not going to pass them out because that would be like the playbill at a theater where everybody takes one and then dumps it in the trash on the way home. But I've got 30 up here, and afterwards, if you're interested in the 40-year history of an unsuccessful dream, they're free. So I'm going to talk about energy, specifically natural gas. And I will say there's no slides. I lost interest in PowerPoint long ago. I'm going to tell you what I know, what I think I know, but also I think this will work better rather than waiting till the end, just butt in. Yeah, I got maybe 20 minutes max, but sure, I could say, sit on your hands, don't say anything until I'm done speaking because I'm important. I'm not that important. But because even with my new progressive trifocals, my eyesight is not good. If I don't call it, just interrupt, please. That's okay. Before I talk about why we're never going to see a North Slope gas pipeline coming into Nikiski and why we may have to import liquefied natural gas into South Central, which I know is not popular with anybody for all the obvious reasons, I'd like to, I guess, compliment the oil and gas production laws in Alaska and the oil and gas producers in Alaska in that North Dakota and Texas, some of the two biggest oil and gas producers in the country, they allow companies to flare their gas at the wellhead. If they don't have pipelines, if there's not enough pipeline capacity to move it to market, if it's just not worth it to them to move market, you can burn it off at the wellhead. North Dakota in September, last month available, North Dakota burned off more than 5% of the gas they produced, more than 150 million cubic feet a day. Right. That's 3/4 of what we need. They just put a match to it. And of course, North Dakota says, oh, no, we deserve a medal because we're doing so much better. In 2011, we used to burn off 36% of the gas we produced. Yeah, I'm not sure they'd get the Nobel Peace Prize for that. Texas, of course, always wants to be bigger than everybody. So the Permian Basin, the most prolific oil and gas field in America these days, spans Texas, New Mexico. Last year, they flared, burned off, wasted, on average, 265 million cubic feet a day. 20% more than we even consume here in South Central. So as I think about this, the hell with the north to south pipeline, we need a south to north pipeline because they're wasting it. Maybe they just give us all that gas for free, and that would solve our problem. But that's not going to happen. So I guess to talk about what's going on in South Central, I'd like to say why I don't think in my lifetime or anybody else's here that you're going to see an 800-mile pipeline from the North Slope down to Nikiski, and why that means South Central's on its own. We're running short of gas. There's a lot up there. You can't get at it. And we're going to have to do something else down here. The state in the past 20 years has spent close to $1 billion on different iterations, variations, proposals for a North Slope gas pipeline. Producers, well, between them in those 20 years probably spent that much too, or pretty damn close. So it's not for lack of trying, not for lack of people who are sincere. I can't say all the state money has been well spent when you think shortages of schools and childcare and job training and $1 billion. It's not like it went up in smoke like it did in North Dakota. It's just, we got the permits, we got the right-of-way, the state does, for the pipeline. No investors, no partners, no customers. Well, then the permits, I don't want to say they're worthless, but they're pretty close to worthless. And this would kind of give you an indication. So the state, after all that money and all the work that they've done, the producers done before them, if the project were to go ahead, they still need to finish engineering and design work. And they figure that's about $150 million. Well, there's no way the legislature's putting any more money into it. So the Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation, all well-meaning, good people, not to criticize them, that state corporation has said, for $150 million, we'll sell you 75% of the project. So you're gonna think, well, you got $1 billion into it and you're willing to sell 75% for 150, you must really be desperate to get some money to finish this. So that's kind of where that is. They get a few million a year from the state to kind of keep rolling along, but to actually even finish the design and engineering to get to a point you could make an investment decision, they need to find $150 million somewhere. You know, the producers left the project, BP, Conoco, Exxon, back in 2016 because they said there's no future here. We got other stuff to do. I will point out, if anybody here is into land speculation, BP, Exxon, and Conoco still have 600 acres or so in Nikiski. I expect they would happily sell it to you. As someone once told me from one of the companies, we'll consider any offer, just make it easily divisible by 3. Don't offer us $1, offer us $3. I don't know if they go that low, but at some point they got to do something with that. So to sort of summarize the 40-year history, the 24 pages in just a couple pages, you know, the dream was, or the expectation was, Asia would want our gas, right? We're on the west coast of North America, closer than anything else to Asia. That's the market. Well, on the map, yeah, in theory, yes. Hasn't turned out that way. Japan is actually taking in less LNG. It's in the decline mode. Couple reasons. More efficient. You know, everybody learns to be more energy efficient because it makes sense. Japan, which shut down all of its nuclears after the Fukushima disaster in 2011, has restarted some of their nuclears and is restarting more. More nuclear power, less need to burn natural gas. And Japan is transitioning to renewables with a net zero emissions target in 20, 25 years from now. So Japan's not a growth market. Think, well, maybe South Korea, not as big as Japan. South Korea has looked at the market, and they are not signing long-term contracts. And that's what you need to underpin financing. If you're going to go to the bank, you want to say, well, I got to borrow tens of billions, but I have these long-term guaranteed contracts to produce revenue to pay off the debt. South Korea has looked at the market and said, yeah, prices are high now, but all these projects are coming online on the US Gulf Coast and the Canadian West Coast and in Qatar in the Middle East and Mozambique. South Korea has looked at and said, we're going to wait for this new supply to flood the market, drive down prices, and then we'll sign long-term contracts. Great for South Korea, doesn't do squat for Alaska. You know, I think the other hope at one point in history was, well, we'll sell to China. It was before China didn't like us and we didn't like China. But, and nothing against Governor Walker, but he courted China, because back then the politics were different, right? We're going to sell to China. Well, politically, that's just not possible now, and China is, their best new friend is Russia. Partially for economics, partially just to stick their thumb out at everyone else. There is already one large pipeline bringing in pipeline gas from Siberia into China. They're going to build a second, both of which would carry more gas than an Alaska LNG, an LNG project. And Russia is also developing its LNG export capacity. You know, Russia used to sell so much gas to Europe. Europe doesn't want it. Russia still got the gas, and they figure, well, hell, we'll just liquefy it and put it in tankers and sell it, because China will buy it, Japan's buying it, India's buying it, and what that does is displace gas that would have gone to them that goes to somebody else in the market. So even though we're not necessarily competing with Russian gas because Europe won't buy it or we won't buy it, it's still supply in the market. Russia has one LNG plant in the Far East, Sakhalin Island, just north of Japan. They've got one in the Arctic. They're opening up a second one in the Arctic in the next few months. After that, they want to do some more, but because of Western sanctions, they're having a hard time getting equipment and engineering expertise, so I don't know how that's going to go. But getting back to the Pacific, where we thought it was our turf, right? This is our market. Well, Shell and its partners have been working the last 4 years on an LNG export terminal in Kitimat, British Columbia, northern BC on the coast. It should start testing out sometime next year and start loading cargoes by 2025. And its partners are the perfect ones you want. They are the customers. Korea Gas, Mitsubishi, PetroChina, Malaysia's state oil and gas company, those are Shell's partners. I mean, this is a solid financial project, not as big as ours, but the advantage to that, they draw the gas for it's called LNG Canada in Kitimat, British Columbia, from the Montney Shale play, which is northeastern British Columbia, Alberta, 450 trillion cubic feet of gas out there. That's like 14, 15 times what we've got on the North Slope. That's proven. So lots of gas. They've already built the pipe. They've built the plant. If there's enough demand in Asia for North American gas, they can just expand it a lot cheaper than we could ever do it. And I guess what I'm trying to say is explain why I don't see our project happening. Yeah.
How far was that pipeline?
Well, actually, that's a depressing story. That pipeline is half our length, 416 miles. I've learned to convert from kilometers to miles very well. The problem they had with that pipeline, it was supposed to be 5 billion, 6 billion, 6.5 billion maybe. It's almost done, and the latest estimate is 14.5 billion. They're at like double the original estimate, which has got to scare you when you look at the Alaska LNG project cost estimate, which is 3 years old. You cannot build anything now for the cost estimate you got 3 years ago. Yeah, they had tremendous overruns. Not glaciers and ice fields like we've got, but mountain ranges and critical habitat. And they actually, as they neared the coast, they had this mountainside they were going to tunnel through. Should work out, great, well, it just didn't. And they had to, at the last minute, change the route and change the drilling method, because what works on paper doesn't always work in reality. But yeah, 14.5 billion for 416 miles.
What size is that pipeline?
I think Alaska LNG was talking 42-inch. I think that's either 30, I think that may be 36, maybe a little smaller. I mean, they've sized it for expansion. Maybe it's 42, but it's 36, 42. Though it's probably in millimeters, and damned if I know what that means. So,
what's
yeah.
the break even on that investment for Canada?
Well, the market's only going to pay what the gas is worth, so they're going to have to write down some of their investment, I
How
think.
many years?
Boy, if they go to expansion, that thing could run 30, 40 years. When you got 450 trillion cubic feet and at current production, you know, they might drain out 2 billion cubic feet a day. I mean, you got couple centuries worth of gas there. Yeah, there's
At whatever cost.
right. And because you got all that gas in Alberta and British Columbia, and it's really not worth much in Western Canada because there's already so much of it. Whatever they get for it, they'll take. Right. The gas is going to be pretty cheap as opposed to the pipeline liquefaction, but Kitimat to Japan, yeah, it's 1 day longer than from Nikiski. Well, that's not going to make that much of a difference. It doesn't give us that much of an advantage. So, you know, it's and like I say, the expansion there would be much more economical than 40, 50 billion for us. There's also a couple other projects. There's one at an old pulp mill site north of Vancouver, about 30 miles, called Wood Fiber LNG, which I think is a great name, right? Wood fiber has nothing to do with natural gas, but it used to be a pulp mill. So, but it's the perfect, they call them brownfield sites. Hell, we've already trashed this acreage. You might as well turn it into a oil and gas facility. It's going to be a lot smaller, but they got all their money from a Singapore investor and a Canadian company. BP is contracted to buy most of the production from the plant, so it's going ahead. And interestingly, First Nations, which is how Canada refers to its indigenous, native people, there are a couple of projects led by First Nations in northwestern British Columbia on the coast. One literally on the waterway that separates Alaska from BC. And they're pursuing environmental review. They haven't put together financing customers, but once that pipe is in, they could do an extension from it. So there's a lot of other people than just us on the West Coast. Also on Baja Peninsula in California, there's an export plant being built. Should be, I'm trying to think, 2025, start producing. And that one was sort of a no-brainer. It was an underused import terminal. So you've already got the dock, the tanks, much of the apparatus. You just got to add liquefaction, becomes very cost effective. The irony to that is it's in Mexico, but they're going to be exporting US gas. Because you got all this gas coming out of the Permian in New Mexico and Texas, and there's no place to send it. There's no pipeline from there to California, to the West Coast. So they can send it back to the US Gulf Coast, but they can get a better price building some pipeline extensions, sending that gas from New Mexico down to Baja and shipping it out from there. So it'll be US gas from the West Coast. It'll just be going through Canada. And that project's already looking at an expansion, and ConocoPhillips has signed on as a potential partner in that expansion. There's nothing against Alaska. They're just going to go where there's the best opportunities. So to sort of conclude on this part, so the U.S. in the 1970s, 80s, a little bit in the 90s, we imported liquefied natural gas. Boston Harbor, Savannah, Georgia, Maryland, Chesapeake Bay, Gulf Coast, pre-shale. So kind of like we just used to import a lot of oil, a lot more than we do now. After shale and U.S. gas production increased, those plants went dormant, mothballed. But then with all the shale gas and oversupply, a couple people figured out, well, I could take those things on the cheap, turn them into an export facility. I've already got a lot of capital investment there. So many of the plants in the U.S. are converted unused import terminals into export, particularly on the Gulf Coast. Well, on the one in Savannah, Georgia, and the one in Chesapeake Bay also. In fact, really the only LNG import terminal in the U.S. that still operates consistently is in Boston Harbor, where, and I know we complain about energy prices here, their natural gas prices are much higher than ours. New England is at literally the end of the pipe for U.S. gas. And because of New England's opposition to new pipelines, they don't have enough capacity to bring gas in. So they import liquefied natural gas. They actually used to import some from Russia before Ukraine. Now they import it from, hell, I don't know where, not the U.S. But natural gas is really expensive, particularly in the winter in New England. So they still have an import terminal to bring it in when they need it in the winter in Boston Harbor, which is you think about Nikiski, we're used to seeing that. You sort of think of yourself in Boston Harbor, what's that big tanker and why is it coming to the dock that I can see from downtown? But no accidents, it's worked well. Most of the U.S. gas is going to go out through the Gulf Coast. There are 5 terminals in operation in Texas and Louisiana right now. The U.S. LNG export capacity as of this year is equal to about 20% of what the world consumed this year. And we went from like 0 to 60 overnight. There's 5 in operation. There's another one coming on next year. There's another in 2025. One of them that's coming on next year is actually a partnership between ExxonMobil and Qatar Energy. There's another one in Texas coming on in 2027 that Conoco owns a 30% stake in. It's just you've got a supportive population. Louisiana throws tax credits at oil and gas industries like we throw dividends at people. And it's just, there's all kind of property tax breaks. Though sadly in Louisiana, when the legislature approves a property tax break, it comes out of the school district budget. Yeah, I know, it's a great idea, right? So you look at what's going on down there, and all those terminals are connected to the pipeline grid. So unlike here, we got to build the pipeline from the North Slope. Down there, you can buy it from anywhere. In fact, there are some gas producers in Western Canada that ship their gas to the U.S. Gulf Coast, where it is liquefied and exported from there. Just pay the pipeline charges, because otherwise I got nothing else to do with it. The last thing I was going to mention is the U.S., when they became #1, overtook Middle East country Qatar, which used to be the largest. We're now bigger and will probably always stay there, even though Qatar is in the middle of a $50 billion expansion. They're increasing their capacity, 60%. And they are like one of the lowest cost producers in the world. You know, their expansion is costing them half as much as what our project would cost in terms of dollars per output. A very low, and Qatar is ideally situated. If you think about the Middle East, they can serve Europe, they can send over to India and China and Japan. They're sort of in the middle of things. The last I was going to mention, Russia is looking to sell more liquefied natural gas. They've got 3 plants. There are plans for others. Whether that happens, I think, will depend a lot on sanctions. The other one is Mozambique, East African nation, again, well situated geographically to serve Europe or the Pacific. The French oil and gas major Total Energies was developing a $20 billion project, close to size of ours. They had to stop work a couple years ago at that site because insurgents were attacking the project site. The government thinks they have, I don't know, neutralized sounds like such an ugly word, but stepped up security. So Total will probably go back to that project this coming year. ExxonMobil also is leading a project in Mozambique. They're going to wait and see how this insurgency, Total Energies thing works out in Mozambique before they start theirs. 2 other things real quickly, and we'll talk about Cook Inlet. So, people think about all the headlines and the attention the Willow project got. All the opposition, whether you like Willow or you support it, had become the poster child this past year for opposition of fossil fuel, particularly in Alaska, particularly in the Arctic. The Alaska LNG project has its federal authorizations to construct and to export, but they have a couple problems. The construction and operation authorization expires in 2030. There's no way, even if there's a gift from heaven, they could have this thing in operation by 2030. So at some point, they're going to have to go back to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and say, could I have an extension? Which means a regulatory process and public review. I think given the political climate, you don't want to raise your hand and say, kick me. because you're seeing that on the Gulf Coast. Some of these projects got approved a few years ago, never made their deadline, have to go back, get an extension, and they're getting opponents because it gives an opponent another bite at the proverbial apple. The other thing is the export authorization, which you have to get to send natural gas out of this country, is in the names of BP, Exxon, and Conoco. So if the project went ahead, they would have to transfer that to someone, another regulatory process, and public review. Not to say the Department of Energy would deny the transfer of authority, but if I'm a kid, right, you don't ask your dad for permission if you think he may say no. So same thing. So it kind of, since I don't think this is going to happen, where does this leave us with Cook Inlet Gas and South Central Utilities? We're sort of left to fend for ourselves. You know, the fields in Cook Inlet been producing, some of them since what, the 60s. They're in decline. Nothing lasts forever, except maybe the permanent fund dividend. We'll have to see how that goes. But we've been here before, right? We've heard warnings. And Homer Electric is the first utility that is going to run short of what it needs under contract. They're going to start coming up short next year, but NSTAR said they'd take care of it and sell it to them because NSTAR has more gas under contract. So that's good news. But then as you get into 2027, 2028, Chugach Electric, Matanuska Electric, NSTAR, their contracts are going to start expiring, and they don't have in place at the moment new supply contracts with Hillcorp, with anybody. And that's quite kind of precipitated it because utilities, yeah, they care about price, but certainty is supply. That's what the utility's there for. They got to know in advance that they're going to have gas delivered at the volume they need for their customers. Certainty of supply is more important than price. It really is. Yeah.
Have you heard of a reliable price, what you would import for?
So the utilities, the question is, what if we have to import, what's it going to be? The utilities have done some preliminary studies. They are working together, all of them on this. Well, they each have their own studies, but they're sharing information. They are scheduled to give sometime in January their next update on a cost analysis. On the preliminary ones they did, they said, well, the cheapest we think we could get imported LNG in here and into the system, because it's not just importing it, it's turning it back into a gas, putting it into a pipe, $12 per 1,000 cubic feet, which is about 50% more than the average price they're paying now, which is around 8, I think. So yeah, it's more. Now, keep in mind, yeah, 50, it's a lot, but I asked Chugach, well, if your fuel costs went up 50%, how much would the electric bill go up? And they said, well, natural gas is about 33% of their total cost. So if the 33% went up by 50%, a Chugach bill might go up 16%. Not to discount the 16%, particularly for people on fixed income, but it's NSTAR, the cost of fuel is a bigger portion of their bill. So it'll be more with NSTAR. But at $12, that depends on what price they get for it. We're not going to be a big customer. You know, we are not going to be the Walmart that can negotiate volume discounts if we buy some gas for Cook Inlet. We're going to be the, oh yeah, I guess I'll sell you a tanker. Geez, will you just go away and buy, you know. We're just going to be a small customer. Because we're not going to hit zero in Cook Inlet. We're just going to need to top off the tank. So it's not a lot, but yeah, it's going to be more. And that'll be the question for the utilities as they negotiate with Hillcorp or Bluecrest or Fury, anybody else. I need certainty of supply, but I also want to get the cheapest gas I can find. And what's it going to cost for new gas? You're not going to get new gas from Hillcorp for the same price they're selling gas that somebody before them explored and started producing decades ago. It's just going to cost more. No way out of it. When we went through this 2010 and people started panicking, we're going to run out, the state of Alaska, in its infinite wisdom, had the idea. And I hate the word incentivize, because I don't think it's a word. But the idea is, well, let's incentivize Cook Inlet production. Let's put state money into it. not like Norway where they own the oil company, but we'll give tax credits. And when you think about it, so they threw all these tax credits at oil and gas companies. On the North Slope, BP back then, before they left, Exxon, Conoco, if they invested in exploration, new production, and they got a tax credit, they would just use it to reduce the production tax check they sent to the state every month. The state would get money, just less because the credit was applied. In Cook Inlet, the credits worked differently because they were giving credits to companies that had no production. They owed no tax. So if I gave you money, a tax credit, and you went and explored, so maybe you have a $200 million exploration plan. Well, you have $200 million and you can't raise it from investors. That's pretty speculative. Well, you would take the piece of paper I'd give you that says, when you do this work, I'll give you $200 million. And you go to Bank of America or ING or other international lenders. You say, I got a piece of paper from the state. I'm going to get $200 million when I finish this work. They audit it. They verify it. I'll essentially sell this to you for 90 cents on the dollar. So you just raised $180 million for your exploration program. You didn't have to sell stock. You didn't have to take in partners. You just essentially resold the IOU from the state. Bank of America said, boy, state of Alaska, they're good for it. Little did they know, and there was an easy, and I'm sort of fudging the numbers, easy 10% return. And that worked well for a number of years until oil prices tanked, the state ran out of money, and the state stopped paying them, which is not what Bank of America planned on. So that source of funding dried up. Even though the state eventually paid off those IOUs, those lenders are not coming back. Their response is, I saw the promotional video, I wrote the checks, and then I waited 4 or 5 years to get repaid with no interest, by the way. I am not falling for that again. And an example of where that's a real day problem, Blue Crest Energy, down by Anchor Point, right? I'm trying to remember my geography here. They were one of the big users of those tax credits to raise money for a very nice drilling operation they put in. And they, I think, wanted to drill 20 oil wells, but then when the financing stopped, they never got to drill all their wells or produce as much oil. And the state has since phased out those credits, pretty much paid off the last of them. Blue Crest, besides for sitting on oil, which they're drilling from the shore, but the oil's deeper underground, so they can go directional from shore at an angle and tap those reservoirs underneath Cook Inlet. There's a lot of gas, but the gas is shallower. They cannot, from that shore pad, drill, take a hard right, and hit the gas. If they're going to produce that gas, they have to put a platform in. Hadn't been a new platform around a long time. They estimate, last I saw, $350 million. They don't have $350 million, and since the tax credits aren't there anymore, they'd have to raise $350 million the old way, which is you go convince someone to invest in your company. Hard to find investors want to put that much money into oil and gas in Cook Inlet, particularly if you had pre-sold all the gas to utilities and you knew you had a revenue stream to pay back your investors, maybe. But you go to the utilities and say, would you help finance this by signing contracts? I think I can get it permitted. I think I can get it built. I think I can get it put in Cook Inlet for this amount, but I can't guarantee it. Makes it utilities, they'd love the gas, but unless they know when it's coming and how much it's going to cost, they can't tell their customers, well, we signed with Blue Crest, and he thinks maybe he can do it if there's no permitting delays, if there's no problems with putting in a new platform, if the cost doesn't escalate. And not to pick on Blue Crest, I like them, they're a good company, but when you don't have capital, you can have gas, or you think you've got gas, but if you can't afford to drill it. The state, just to sort of close off on that, these checks they wrote for the tax credits in Cook Inlet alone, forget the North Slope, forget the ones at XNB, $1.7 billion over the past decade. I mean, the state poured a lot of money into this. If you look around, I'm not sure they got a whole lot for it, but it was it was a well-intentioned attempt. How's that? So as you think about Cook Inlet now, yeah, Blue Crest would like to do more, Fury would like to do more, they need money. No one is going to build an oil and gas platform in Cook Inlet or even a whole new onshore development on speculation. It's not like, hey, I don't have buyers for this duplex, but I know I can sell it in Soldotna. How you can sell a duplex in any town in the state. No one builds things like that on speculation. They do in the lower 48 because as long as you got a pipeline nearby, you can sell it anywhere. Here, no one in Cook Inlet, because if the utilities don't buy it, there's no market for your gas. Hillcorp, Blue Crest, nobody's going to spend tens, hundreds of millions of dollars to develop gas unless they know someone's going to buy it. And not just for 1 year or 2 years, but for enough years to recover their investment and make a profit. It's not evil, it's just not in their interest. So again, that gets back to the problem here. We need the gas. Companies would like to look for it, but there's got to be this marriage between the utilities and Hillcorp. Let's face it, they do close to 90% of the Cook Inlet production. They have money to pay to invest in things. Kind of an aside, I don't know if you've heard, there are some legislators who think the state should sue Hillcorp to take back leases. This novel legal theory that Hillcorp is not producing their gas, they're in violation of the lease, we should take the lease back. Okay, I don't think that works, I mean legally. The leases say if you don't do anything with the lease in X number of years, you lose it. That's the penalty. The lease doesn't say you must produce gas regardless what it costs you, regardless if anybody wants to buy it, and regardless if you ever make any money off of it. But there is among some this notion that we can force them to. Also, if you took back the lease, who the hell is going to buy it? Right. Yeah, it's like Anwar. No one bid on Anwar. I take that back. There was one Dumbo who bought Anwar leases, and that was the state of Alaska. Though it's funny, of course, so the state bought the leases. They send in their annual lease payment of $500,000 to the feds. Because the feds don't recognize the leases, they send it back. They don't cash it, they just send it back. It's nice that adults have nothing else to do in life but pass back and forth $500,000 checks. So, you know, and there's certainly some political animosity to Hillcorp around the state because they are structured, not anything nefarious. They're an S-corp, which many business owners are. It is the most popular way for businesses to set up themselves. Alaska does not tax S-corps or LLCs because when the Alaska Corporate Tax Code was written, LLCs and S-corps didn't exist. So yes, BP paid corporate income tax. BP sold to Hillcorp. Hillcorp doesn't pay corporate income tax. It makes them a bad company. There are some who want to change the state's corporate income tax code, not to tax all S-corps or LLCs because that would tax doctors, accountants, chiropractors, lawyers. Can't have that. They want to rewrite the law so it really only taxes one company. Well, there's not unanimity in the legislature on that. Anyway, in testimony before the legislature in May, Hillcorp's vice president for Alaska, senior VP for Alaska, said since 2012, when they bought up the old legacy assets in Cook Inlet, they spent more than $1 billion in Cook Inlet in those 10 years. 90 new wells, 400 repaired wells, new technology, boosting production. This guy, Luke Sager, who's their, like I say, senior VP, said they plan to spend another $1 billion in Cook Inlet over the next 5 years, 2023, 2028. They're doing some drilling, Whiskey Gulch near Happy Valley this coming year. I think what Hillcorp needs to know from the utilities is how much gas do you want and for how long? Because Hillcorp is not going to invest to produce gas that the utilities are going to say, well, really only wanted 2 or 3 years because we're going to renewables. Not NSTAR, they need gas. You know, they got no other choice. Chugach, Homer, particularly Chugach, Golden Valley, and Fairbanks, Matanuska Electric, wind, solar is sort of popular. They dream about tidal, but that's like me dreaming about being 30 years old again. It's just not. Tidal's a long way out. But Hillcorp and the utilities need to figure out how much gas do we need, how long do we need it for. Then Hillcorp can run the numbers and look at its prospects and say, well, this is what we can deliver, and when and how much. Hopefully, there is an agreement out of there. Because, yeah, it's embarrassing to think about Alaska importing gas.
Don't you think they have those numbers now?
Well, I think Hillcorp knows how much it would cost to develop this prospect, but Hillcorp doesn't know how much utilities want. And I don't think the utilities know. That's part of the problem. You've got the utilities, they want to accelerate a transition to renewables. There's, you think of the $1.7 billion we spent on tax credits in Cook Inlet. The federal government's, that's petty cash to what they're throwing at renewables. So, and the utilities don't really even know, because part of the problem with decarbonizing the rail belt, we don't have the transmission lines. We have transmission lines that go from the gas generating plants or the coal plants. Well, the solar farms and the wind towers are not going to be in the middle of the highway like we built the generating plants. They're talking to really build out the South Central, the rail belt energy grid, make it robust enough that you could expand Bradley Lake, move more power, so you can have a submarine cable from the Kenai Peninsula into Anchorage rather than building another power line along the highway, so you can bring renewables in and out of Fairbanks, out to Glen Ellen. They're talking $2 billion and a lot of years to permit and build that. So Hillcorp's problem is, I don't think the utilities know. They know what they need in 2027, 2028, but for long-term contracts, what are they going to need in 2032? Well, I'm not sure. They have targets for renewables, but what if they under-contract and they run up short? Or what if they over-contract and say, well, I got to pay for this gas even though I put in the new solar farm, I don't need it. It's tough on both of them. It really is. But yeah, I'm sure Hillcorp knows what prospects they have, how much it would cost roughly to bring them on, but someone's got to tell them how much and how long before they do it. So that's why if you're a utility, you're thinking, okay, if this doesn't work with Hillcorp or Blue Crest or Fury, and I have to import LNG, at least the supply is there, no question about it. We're not even a drop of what's available on the market for what we need. Probably we could get it from Canada. It's a lot closer than any place else. Plus, people familiar, natural gas, they inject that artificial sulfur smell into gas so you can know, well, I think it'd be kind of cool if we get gas from Canada, they could inject it with a maple scent. And then if you have a leak, you say, oh, cool, that's Canadian gas. No law says it's got to smell like rotten eggs. Anyway, so no shortage of gas, but it's going to take time. So the utilities, they have some options. They can build a massive import terminal on shore. Well, they don't want to do that. Hundreds of millions of dollars, permitting. They could probably get the 600 acres from the LNG project, but that's going to take more years than they want. And because long term, they'd like to decrease the gas, they don't need a big onshore. So they think, well, maybe we could lease for 5 years, maybe 10 years, a floating import facility, which essentially is a converted LNG tanker that ties up at the dock, deliveries come in, offload into the tanker, and the tanker has the capability to warm up the gas, turn it back, warm up the liquid, turn it back into a gas and put it in the pipeline grid. You can lease those. Right now, that's a lot of what Europe is doing, because Europe, after losing Russian gas, is actually accelerating their transition to renewables. So they don't want to build onshore. They like these leased facilities. It's possible 10 years from now you could pick up one of these leased import terminals for the price of a used Honda, just because there'll be so many built. Yeah.
Using that 50%.
If you believe the estimates, you'd actually save 25 or 30%. The problem with that is, even with global warming, the North Slope is iced in a lot of the year. So you'd either,
Russian tankers are icebreakers.
well, not ours. Now the Russian projects, they don't have this problem because the Russian government has a massive fleet of nuclear powered icebreakers, and they essentially let the LNG project use them for free. The US government has no icebreakers. So yeah, if you had a fleet of icebreakers to keep escorting and rotating and shuttling back and forth, well, at that point you might as well just build the damn pipeline. The other problem up on the North Slope, it is really shallow. To build an offshore loading facility, you'd have to go, I don't know, 5 miles, 7 miles out with a causeway with a buried pipe, hoping the ice scour doesn't chew up your pipe. And I'm sorry, I can't conceive in this country today that you could get permits to build an offshore anything having to do with fossil fuel in the Arctic. So you have permitting and you have getting out off the shelf to deep water and then dealing with the ice. But there is a guy, actually Meade Treadwell, former lieutenant governor under the late Governor Wally Hickel, that's his project called Kilek LNG. His idea is to build one floating offshore. He's tried it for years and gotten very far for all those reasons. Yeah.
So do the utilities have any plans in the works for doing either solar farms or wind farms?
Yeah, Matanuska Electric, Chugach, Golden Valley, yeah, they are aggressively. Chugach just this past year did a request for proposals, considering them. They have signed contracts, but how quickly will it happen?
And will that be with federal funds?
That's their hope. Everyone wants federal funds. The state did get, I think, $250 million of federal funds to help go toward the the new power lines, but it has to be matched by the state. So the legislature, if they're going to get the $260 million from the feds for the new transmission lines, they're going to have to come up with $260 million out of the state somewhere. But yeah, the utilities are just, we can sit here and say, well, you should have done this 5 years ago. Well, they didn't, and now how quickly can they bring them up? And that's great for Chugach, Homer, Matanuska, doesn't do anything for NSTAR, except that the more the electrical utilities go to renewables and burn less gas, that makes more gas available for NSTAR. So hopefully there's somewhere in there where the numbers work out so that we don't have to import LNG. Nothing bad about it, just it's embarrassing. Yeah.
The dollar amount on that is 206.5
Okay, 200 million.
on the federal money, and then 206.5 on the match.
Yeah.
From the
Okay.
state and or
I knew it was 200 something.
or the Kiski to Beluga. And
Yeah, right, that's the underwater line. So just to finish up the idea of imports, so the utilities could do it. They could band together at least one of these floating units. That's less capital intensive, less of a commitment, kind of more cost per molecule of gas, but less expensive. Probably buy gas from Canada, seems logical. And Marathon's confirmed they are looking at going into LNG imports. Marathon, you probably know, owns the old Conoco-Nikiski LNG plant. They picked it up cheap years ago. Picked it up for about $10 million. Funny story in that, companies don't like sharing numbers and finances with the people. Someone from Marathon gave a courtesy briefing to Mayor Pierce, which should tell you enough. Said, don't tell, but we paid $10 million, we bought it. Mayor Pierce announces at a borough assembly meeting to the public, well, they paid $10 million for this. Because I'm sure it never occurred to someone at Marathon, tell him not to repeat it, he's just not that smart. Well, anyway, he did. So they paid $10 million, probably not a bad price. They got a dock, they got waterfront acreage, they got the facility. Marathon applied for and received federal approval to turn that into an import facility. They got that, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. They haven't done anything with it, but a big cost of running the refinery is energy. You need energy to cook the crude and turn it into everything you make out of it. One theory is Marathon went and got federal approval to import LNG to use in negotiations with Hilcorp. But Hilcorp, Marathon actually just a couple months ago said, well, we're thinking maybe we'd import. the great thing for utilities is it's not their problem. Marathon could spend the money, turn that plant to an import terminal. They got storage tanks. They got to check them, make sure after 60 years they're still leak-free. And then Marathon could lease capacity to the utilities. So that's a possibility. But I guess in conclusion, if the utilities, because they need certainty of supply when the contracts run out, don't feel they're going to get the gas they need at a price they can afford, or we can afford, from Cook Inlet, and that they're going to have to import by 2028, they got to make a decision in 2024.
Are the utilities showing a reduced consumption of nat gas yet?
Oh, I just,
Like HEA is using 14.5 or 15 million a day.
yeah, I think they are.
More and more still, right?
No, actually, I think they're showing less.
Starting to come down?
The electrical utilities, because they are bringing on some.
Yeah, not in stock.
Yeah, I went to a TrueGauge briefing, and I think they are starting to see, or at least flattening out. First of all, population's not growing. We're getting new industry.
Can you repeat the questions, please?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So the question is, are utilities showing decline in consumption of kilowatt hours? And I believe flat or a small decline, because we're not a growth population. 10 years in a row, more people have left the state than moved here, but not enough to solve the problem.
Do they have any kind of internal projections on when they're going to move away from?
That's one thing they're working on. And I saw a bunch of charts that says, well, high scenario, middle scenario, low scenario, depending how quickly these things get permitted, how much investors put into it, how quickly they can build. What about some of these federal tax credits, permitting sites? Not everyone wants wind farms within their site. And to do solar, even you got to have a lot of land. Yeah.
So why not do tidal around the putting it on there?
Yeah. A lot of people are looking at tidal. I think that is years away. Yes, it's better than wind or solar, right? Because 24 hours, solves the problem of intermittent wind, intermittent sun. No one has really perfected tidal power, particularly in a place like here where you've got tremendous currents, siltation, beluga whales, salmon. That's going to take a lot of technology, a lot of trial and error, and a lot of contentious permitting. I was at a presentation a year ago from Hillcorp who said, we've been thinking about this, and to do tidal, you basically got to bolt that thing to something. We got platforms. So Hillcorp, this was a year ago, haven't talked to them since then, their idea was they were going to do some very small tidal power test units. Their idea was, let's put some on a platform, small ones, just enough to power that platform. We know they'll break. We know the current and the siltation will wreck the mechanics, but only by breaking them will we figure out what works. And they're working with a couple universities and federal labs, but I think tidal is a long way off. But yeah, that's the holy grail, right?
Another thing is the ice in the wintertime.
Right.
It's really hard.
And debris, logs, anything else. So as Hillcorp explained, you got to find that place in the water column where you're away from the logs and debris, you're away from salmon and beluga runs, you're away from the siltation that flows along the bottom, and yet you got strong enough current. A lot of trial and error on that. And even Hillcorp admitted they were looking at some maps. They said, well, this is the best place for tidal, but here's where our platforms are. They're not bad, but it's a good place to start, so you don't have to build something new in the inlet. So yeah, people are looking at it. It's going to be a long time. Yeah.
We obviously have a very small market
Yes.
in Alaska.
Yeah.
It's smaller than the county that I used to live in.
Yeah, I think the correct term is pissant.
Yeah. But I'm reading a lot about volcanoes in Iceland.
Yes.
Well, we've got volcanoes.
Right, and there's a company that's doing some exploratory drilling. No one has figured that out yet, but there's been some companies on the west side of Cook Inlet, out in the Aleutians. They're trying, just haven't cracked it yet.
Too far down, not really.
Well, if it's close by on the west side, the power lines are nearby, but yeah, they need a consistent enough source of hot enough, and they just,
Not underneath us.
just haven't found it yet.
Right.
I mean, actually, I was a little surprised last year. I was in the Capitol, and there was someone who said, well, this is the chance for coal again. We know there's a lot of coal on the west side of Cook Inlet. It's available, it's cheap. Yeah, clean coal. So I was at a presentation in Washington, D.C., I don't know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and there's a coal company and a gas company guy on the stage. And the coal guy went first, talked about clean coal, clean technology, and the gas guy comes up there and says, before I go into my presentation, show you my slides, has anybody held a piece of coal in their hand, and can you tell me it's clean? Yeah. Right, another day, another decade passed. Manager said, oh, hell with it, go to west side of Cook Inlet, take the coal. Borough lands. Borough could have gotten some money out of it. You know, there was some talk, I don't know, 10 years ago, this notion that you don't mine the coal, you basically light it on fire in place underground, and you put your generating apparatus underground so the coal never makes it to the surface. You sort of, you know, right, didn't. Yeah, had happened. Other, yeah.
I'd ask that you would fill me in on the meaning of or what has really gone on with Fairbanks gas supply. I believe there is or was a small, to use your term, pissant
Yeah.
LNG plant
Actually,
down
Big Lake.
near, yes.
Yeah, actually it was smaller than Pissant, but yeah.
Yeah. And then I believe I've heard rumors there's an LNG plant being built to supply.
On the North Slope, right. So,
How does that make economic sense?
state money. So there's something called the Interior Gas Utility. Fairbanks City, what's the other city up there? The Candy Canes, North Pole, Fairbanks Borough, got together, formed the Interior Gas Utility. For years, for several decades, there's a small liquefaction plant in Big Lake, and they would take gas out of the N-Star pipe, liquefy it, put it in 40-foot thermos bottles, insulated tankers, and truck it up to Fairbanks. The Interior Gas Utility was worried, gee, I don't know, we may not be able to get enough gas, so they struck a deal with Hillcorp last year. Hillcorp's got lots of gas on the North Slope, and Hillcorp is building, actually I think they haven't started building, the modules are being built outside, they'll be trucked and barged in, but they are going to install a small liquefaction plant on the North Slope and truck, instead of from Big Lake to Fairbanks, they're going to truck from essentially Prudhoe Bay to Fairbanks. The Interior Gas Utility just put an order in for its tanker trucks, $15 million or so, I think, for the trucks, and they'll contract with someone to drive them. And they have been building out some connections, expanding the distribution system in Fairbanks, building big storage tanks. Well, two things on that. The price they got with Hillcorp for the gas, the liquefaction, the trucking, the storage, the regasification in Fairbanks, by the time that gas is delivered to the burner tip, it's going to be $25 per 1,000 cubic feet. Pretty expensive stuff, 2 to 3 times what we're paying here. But it's better for the environment, certainly, than diesel. What made, I don't want to say cost effective, because it's hard to think of that as cost effective, what really helped that is the state of Alaska gave the Interior Gas Utility a loan to pay for the build out of the pipe system and the storage tanks and so much else. Actually, I was working for Mike Navarre as mayor when this happened, and we both looked at the loan terms. It's if I got this right, a 50-year loan, 5-0, no payments the first 15 years. Then the next 35 years, yeah, there's payments, but we'll charge you 0.5%. Well, essentially, it's free money. Yeah. So, yeah, they are trying to do more natural gas in Fairbanks, even with the state gift of essentially no interest loan. It's still going to be $25. Now, maybe if they get more volume, they'll drive the cost down, but trucking tanks of it, 1 million cubic feet of truck is a really expensive way to do it. Yeah.
Excuse me, Larry. I'm trying to recall, isn't there a small natural gas pipeline from the slope to Fairbanks?
No, there's.
I know they used to have some going to the pump stations.
Right, they used to have small, right, they would take some gas from the North Slope to some of the pump stations, but never went into Fairbanks. Yeah, first couple. Yeah, the question was, is there a pipeline from the North Slope into Fairbanks? There's not. They went to the first couple pump stations, but not into Fairbanks. Yeah, Fairbanks would love natural gas by pipe instead of $25 one truckload at a time. And hopefully none of those trucks overturn.
So, going back a long time, what was the original,
Yeah.
original design? What size pipeline recommended if we had one? I heard all your.
Right, so the question is what size pipe for the large volume, big export project? Originally, at one point, they were looking at 48-inch diameter pipe, which essentially nobody makes, and they decided to scale it back to a 42-inch pipe. That's still a lot of steel, a lot of tons, very expensive, high pressure. So yeah, they had settled on a 42-inch pipe so they could expand it. And truthfully, yeah, you can make the pipe smaller, but a lot of the expense is the trenching and the siding, so you save some steel, but you don't make the project economical by downsizing it. There was talk at one point of making a much smaller line. People call it the standalone line, the Alaska line, the bullet line, just a small line that would go from the North Slope to South Central. Well, I don't know, that was $10 billion, but without an export market and our small little market here, you can't cover 10 billion. That was an old estimate anyhow. Yeah, so that went by the name the bullet line, which I've renamed the bite the bullet line. There are some people, actually it was NSTAR, who said, well, the bullet line idea would work if the state subsidized 80% of the cost. Well, I can think of a lot better things we should do with $8 billion than subsidize energy, but that's just, yeah.
Larry, did you, I guess when the Biden administration came in, they reviewed the EIS for the pipeline project?
Right.
And approved it.
Right.
Did you read that thing, or do you know
Yeah.
what was in that?
Right. So the question was, when the Biden administration came in, they sort of re-reviewed the environmental authorization. What they actually, so there's two authorizations. One is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which gives you permission to build and operate it. They didn't change that. The other one was the Department of Energy authorization to export gas. And under the new administration, they ordered a supplemental environmental impact statement of the export authorization. And in true government fashion, they said, well, this project would spew a lot of CO2 into the atmosphere, but if we don't sell the gas to Japan, they'll just buy it and spew gas somewhere else, so it doesn't change the world. Because if it's not our gas, it'll be someone else's. So they reviewed it and said, okay, you can go ahead.
I thought there was something in there about the project couldn't have CO2 emissions. Did you read that?
Yeah, so the question is, did that supplemental EIS say no emissions?
From the project itself, like
Yeah, there was something about that. Now, in terms of does it require no emissions, the company, there really wouldn't be any CO2 emissions on the slope because all that CO2 would be reinjected underground. The question comes down to what about the compressor stations and the equipment? And yes, there is talk about there no emissions or net, but I think, how would I put it? That's like the least of their problems. But yeah. Right, the emissions that would come from the Cat D9s that are building the roads, yeah, they'd have to figure something out on that. Yeah.
Do we know what that gas is going to cost coming out of British Columbia? Like, have they been signing long-term
Right.
contracts?
So the question is, what would the gas cost coming out of BC? No, I mean, I think the utilities have put some placeholders in there, sort of based on today's prices. But if you think about it, if the utilities bought gas from the Shell project in Kitimat, if they buy it under contract, they get a fixed price. But if they don't want to sign a contract, then it's what's called the spot price, whatever the market's paying that day. So I think they've put some placeholders in, but they have not had contract discussions. But they did estimate that by the time it gets put into a pipeline here, it could be $12 to $15, just depending.
So you think it'll be cheaper than gas from other sources for us, like in Indonesia or Australia?
Yes, the question would be cheaper. Sure, I think gas from Canada would probably be cheaper than buying it from Indonesia, just the tanker charges. You know, those things can be $200,000 a day. So yeah, I think getting it from Canada or Mexico would be cheaper than Indonesia. So that just would be my guess. Yeah, and even though there's a lot of U.S. gas on the West Coast because of the Jones Act, there's no way to get it here. Plus, you'd have to go through the Panama Canal. Yeah. So, NSTAR is owned by a Canadian company. Question is there any connection? I don't think NSTAR's parent company has any financial involvement in the pipeline to Kitimat. The pipeline to Kitimat is,
PNG, one of their subsidiaries, PNG has a pipeline up Kitimat.
but it's not the one that's going to the LNG plant. The one that's going to the LNG plant is what's called TC Energy now. It used to be TransCanada. They changed their name. I guess I don't see that. You know, their business here is selling gas. And the fact that they're a Canadian company, I don't think is, they'd love to buy Cook Inlet gas. It's a lot easier. They're not going to make anything more if they buy Canadian gas, even if it is maple scented.
Excuse me, Larry.
Yeah.
So I'm understanding you, previously you talking, to say we had to do that and we have to buy LNG tankers.
Yeah.
Do we do or do we don't have the infrastructure out there now?
Right, so the question is, if we imported LNG, do we have the infrastructure there now? No, there's a dock, there's storage tanks at Nikiski, but there's apparatus at the dock to load a tanker, not unload it. It's a different apparatus, and there's no equipment out there. Basically, liquefied natural gas is super cool to, I don't know, is it minus 256 degrees Fahrenheit? You warm it up and turn it back into a gas. They don't have that equipment out there. So someone would have to invest in the offloading facilities, the gas regasification it's called. But you got the dock and storage tanks, which is something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any viability of exploring ammonia or hydrogen would be decent sources to use?
So the question is viability of ammonia, hydrogen sources. So the Alaska LNG project promotes themselves as, well, we could make hydrogen. And so there's hydrogen is like everyone loves green hydrogen. There's three kinds of hydrogen out there. There's gray hydrogen that's made from natural gas. The world doesn't want that because, well, you know, I'm going to renewables. I don't want natural gas, and I don't want hydrogen made from natural gas. There's blue hydrogen, where you make the hydrogen, even if you use natural gas, burn natural gas for the electricity, you sequester the carbon dioxide underground. That's sort of okay. What the world really wants is green hydrogen, where you use renewable power, wind, solar, whatever, to generate the electricity to separate the hydrogen from water. Well, if we had that much renewable energy here, we'd use it ourselves rather than making hydrogen. So yeah, people talk about it, but I think that's sort of the next generation, for us at least. Because it takes a lot of electricity to separate out the hydrogen. And then hydrogen has got to be cooled even colder than natural gas to put in a tanker and ship it to a customer. So one thing that people are looking at is, well, you can make hydrogen and then basically mix it in with the ammonia, which is easier to ship the ammonia overseas and let them re-separate the hydrogen from it. But that's your lifetime, not mine. I don't know how long. I mean, I don't see any other hands. So, like I say, oh yeah. Is there any good news? Well, any good news? Let's see. We have a mayoral election in Anchorage in April. That's good news. What else is good news? The legislature's coming back. I think supporters of increased funding for education are making some progress. But it'll still come down to a fight between school funding and dividends, sadly. But I think there's some good news there. I guess it is good that the utilities, they're just like us, right? You know, I've got lots of things at home I should be dealing with, and the next earthquake comes will remind me, damn, I needed to take down those shelves before they fell and broke it. So the utilities and the public and elected officials. They sort of skated by the 2010 energy shortfall. Well, now it's real, and this whole idea of importing LNG has kind of kicked them in the head. So the good thing is they're dealing with it as well they can with the timeline they've got. They've just got to make a decision next year. If they're going to import, they got to start permitting contracts. So there's that kind of go, no-go decision. Hopefully, they and Hillcorp, other producers, will figure some way out of it. And I do sort of joke, can you imagine how many politicians will show up at the dock for the ribbon cutting when the first imported LNG arrives? Yeah, nobody. But so the good thing is they're acknowledging we got to decide. We got to pick something here and go with it and figure out how to pay for it and put a lot. And the fact that the utilities are actually working together is good. That's been part of the problem for decades. Those utilities did not work together. That's one reason you got such a mess of power lines that don't really move electricity efficiently. So the fact they're working together is, that's positive. You know, that and spring training starts in February.
Well, is this just a localized problem for us on the peninsula?
Yeah.
What about Anchorages? I'm not worried about them, but.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't care
saying
about Anchorage either.
That's another.
Well, no, but
Bigger market.
right. So the question is, it localized? No, it's South Central, from the Matsu through Anchorage to Kenai Peninsula. It's all the same gas, same power generation, same power lines. Yeah,
Everybody needs it.
yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, I guess Anchorage is better off that they pay less for electricity than Homer Electric charges. Homer Electric, I think, is what, twice? Well, it's quite a bit more than Chugach charges in Anchorage, but no, they're all in the same boat. The only difference is when their existing contracts expire, and Homer's the first to expire. Chugach Electric, when they took over Municipal Light and Power, they own a portion of the Beluga gas field, so they're in a little better shape because some of their gas is their own, but it's South Central wide. Yeah, it's all of us, and you know that's if it were just a Kenai problem, kiss off state help. That's not going to happen, but since it affects Anchorage, that's good, because that brings in a lot of legislators and a lot of political pressure. So when Anchorage solves its problem, it helps the Kenai. If the Kenai were on its own, you know, would Anchorage care about the Kenai River if they didn't fish here? It's sort of that. I mean, Anchorage drives it. Anchorage and the Matsu, that's where the votes and the legislators are. But I will say, Kenai Peninsula has more clout than Southeast. Southeast politically is sort of like, oh yeah, them. Yeah. Okay, one more.
Get their gas from Canada?
Pardon?
Does Juneau get their gas?
Juneau has propane only.
That's it?
Yeah, actually, most propane in the Northwest is Canadian propane. But yeah, Juneau has propane, hydroelectricity, diesel backup. Yeah, there's no gas. You know, there's some people who think, well, if this project on the border between British Columbia and Alaska goes ahead, then you could gasify southeast. Yeah, if you build receiving terminals, storage tanks, pipelines. I mean, anybody been to Juneau? Can you imagine tearing up the streets in Juneau to put in a pipeline network? Yeah, right. So, yeah, we have lots of dreams in Alaska. Anyway, does someone else want to end this? Or yeah.
Why do we have so many utilities?
So the last question, why do we have so many utilities? I think we should have nationalized the utilities decades ago. They were not cooperating, they weren't working together. You know, so if I'm going to move power from Bradley Lake to Fairbanks, I got to keep paying toll booth charges for different utilities along the way. The lines have different capacities. Yeah, we should have, I guess, the equivalent of nationalized the utilities long ago, but you know, they each have their own clout, their political will, their constituency. But I'm not governor. I can't do it, but we should have. Would have been more efficient. And I do have those 30 of the reports if anybody's into history, like I say, but you don't have to take them.